Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Eric Coleman with IIST and I will be the moderator for today's webinar, Trimming Down Your QA Effort While Maintaining Quality by Clenice Cheney. We're excited you're able to join us today. Set aside an hour to attend this webinar. This webinar is one of a series of free webinars to introduce the topics as well as the presenters of the upcoming PSQT conference in San Diego, California, August 14th through the 19th at the Sheraton San Diego Hotel and Marina. PSQT is the only conference that focuses on practical best practices in every aspect of software quality assurance and testing. The ongoing theme of the conference, Practical, Proven, Feasible, keeps the focus on what works. To learn more about this exciting conference, visit psqtconference.com. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing within 48 hours at psqtconference.com. You may submit your questions at any time by using your question box in your GoToWebinar window. Today's presenter will answer as many questions within the time allowed at the end of today's session. At the end of today's session, you'll be asked to complete a short survey. At IIST, we strive to provide the highest quality educational resources for the public and would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to complete this short survey. I will now turn the webinar over to today's presenter, Clenice Cheney. Clenice?
Okay, welcome. I'd like to welcome you to Trimming Down Your QA Effort While Maintaining Quality. In 2011, Mark Anderson wrote in the Wall Street Journal article talking about software is eating the world. And in that article, he talked about how software is driving and accelerating disruption in almost every industry. And he discussed a future where business innovation and agility is directly related to the velocity and quality of software delivery. So this class, which is a full-day class, I'm doing a webinar today. It's a one-hour overview of what the content that's covered in the class. So this topic looks at trying to come up with reasonable responses to the challenges that are faced by that future depicted by Mark Anderson. In the 2015-2016 World Quality Report by HP and Serengeti, they discuss how the rapid adoption of digital strategies across all of the industries and the impact that they're having on quality assurance and testing. So they discussed the need to respond to this demand for greater assurance that all of these systems that are interconnected together are both secure and consistent for all users. So this class will provide you with some of the tools to evaluate and assess your organization, looking for ways to be more effective and more efficient in what you're trying to deliver, which in the end should be service to your customers. So there are three main topics that we'll discuss: lean waste and software quality assurance and control at a high level. We'll talk about identifying and assessing your organization's waste. And then finally, at the end, we'll talk about what to do about the waste that you've identified within your organization. So what you see on the screen right now is the information from the World Quality Report 2015-2016. And the most interesting thing that I found about that report was the unprecedented rise or increase since 2014 in the amount of IT budget that's allocated to QA and testing. It's risen to approximately 35%. And so while this budget increase suggests a growing awareness of the value of QA and testing, it also sort of implies that the practices isn't really able to meet the increasing demands and still maintain a level of efficiency. So it's an indication that the quality of software isn't really correlating positively to the increase in spending, which sort of begs the question, are we spending more on testing? Yes, we are, but are we getting better quality software from it? Now, as an industry expert for about 30 years, I'm not subscribing to the concept that testing is totally accountable for software quality. So that lack of quality isn't laid at testing's feet. But I do have to question if we're getting the best that we should have from what we are spending on testing. And so when we look at this increased budget and the increased cost of testing and quality as it continues to rise, more and more companies are beginning to look for new ways to reduce the cost of testing and software delivery, while also reducing delivery timeframes, which leads us again to this presentation and the concepts that we'd like to talk about going forward, which is the concept of lean. Lean is a system for continuous process improvement. It began with the Toyota production years ago, and what they were trying to accomplish at Toyota was they were trying to shorten that cycle from when the customer orders a car to when the business actually received the cash from that order of the car. And so they did this by defining what was value to the customer. And then once you identified and were clear about what the value that they were trying to provide in their car to the customer, then they were able to then look at the processes that they used for creating that car and organize and improve those processes so that they could deliver that car at the highest quality with the minimal amount of waste. So when we think about right now, where are we with looking at waste in the quality assurance and the software testing and quality management era? So it is about removing waste and identifying value. So if we understand that the processes, the activities that we do to create the work, which is planning, testing, designing tests, executing tests, providing reports about the status of quality, if we understand the idea, the concept of processes, then we understand that about 85% of the processes that we have waste in them. So what we're looking for, because a lot of times we have bad processes, so we're trying to look at the processes, and from the testing perspective, we've got 4 major ones: planning, design, executing, and reporting. So we want to look at those key process areas and find the waste, remove the waste, and then ensure that we know what the customer is expecting of us in terms of value. So what does it mean in terms of a service industry like providing quality assurance versus a production industry like Toyota and the cars? The indications are really good for us. A lot of the surveys and data that's been collected has shown that in the service industry, lean has been able to demonstrate some significant savings. So in the area of lead time reductions, we've seen in the service industry, not the manufacturing industry, but in the service industry, we have seen reductions in lead time by 35, 54, 56, up to 66% in terms of accomplishing your product deliverable. In the terms of rework reduction, we're seeing approximately 80% reduction using lean in a service industry type environment. We've seen productivity increases up to approximately 30%. So when you combine the reductions in terms of lead time, rework, and productivity, the data indicates that lean is a potential tool for us in the service industry to identify waste, remove those wastes, make sure we're providing the value that our customers are looking for in terms of providing quality assurance and software testing services. So what we see now is looking at waste and software testing. There's a lot of information about, and if you can do your search on the internet, and it'll talk about the 7 key wastes that are associated with lean concepts. And so what you see on the screen are those 10 key identified concepts in terms of waste relative to lean, but we're going to talk about them at a high level today in the context of testing. So when we talk about the concept of the waste of overproduction in the manufacturing world, we're talking about that you have manufactured an item before it's really required. And so it's sort of like sitting around waiting to be used. And so you've overproduced in that manufacturing process. When we think about software testing, where is the possible areas for overproduction? So one of them could be in the area of tests that we have planned that may not be executed. It could be in the area of whether or not there's waste between our different phases between planning and design and execution. So there's a potential that we have overproduced in the area of test data, maybe overproduced in the area of the environment that we're setting up, or potentially overproduced in the area of actual tests that may not be needed when we actually get around to the execution. So the next topic to talk about in terms of waste from the lean perspective is unnecessary stock. So again, we're looking at from the manufacturing perspective, we're looking at work that's in progress that, again, and this is a direct result of overproduction. So you've overproduced, so you've got things that are waiting in stock, again, waiting to be used. So instead of arriving at the time that you need it, or just in time, it's actually waiting, taking up space, taking up inventory. So when we look at software testing, are there places, or in test planning or test design or test execution, are there places where we might have unnecessary stock in the area of software testing? One area or an example could be we've got testing teams that need to be more flexible in terms of the various work products that we have to produce in the testing life cycle. Maybe some of them are produced much early in the life cycle, and therefore they're waiting to be used until we get to the point that we need it. When I talk about these items, these are examples for you to understand the concept. We'll talk later about how you take these concepts and look at your organization, your processes, your customers to determine if these areas of waste are actually waste that apply to how you're doing business rather than from that general concept. Then the next one we have is inefficient transporting. So when we're talking about in the manufacturing world, we're talking about the transporting the process or the inventory item from one place to another place for it to be used. And again, the idea is that that transportation doesn't really add value to the customer. And so when we look at software testing, we can look at the way that information gets to the tester. We can look at the amount of meetings there are that the software testing team and the development team are participating in. So those are potential ways to look at this concept of inefficient transporting in the context of software testing. When we look at unnecessary motion, again, another waste area, this is related to ergonomics. And since software testing really isn't like a physical manufacturing, this might be a difficult concept to look at in terms of relating it to software testing and waste. But again, there are instances where organizationally there may be some unnecessary motion. But if we translate the idea as the amount of maybe releases that get to the required quality, this could be a way of looking at that inefficient transporting. If we think about, for instance, where we potentially put something in production and then immediately release a patch because we didn't want to wait for that fix to be done because we needed to actually meet that production deadline, but immediately you've got a fix that has to go in terms of a patch. So those are the kinds of examples of translating that concept into our world versus the manufacturing world. Then we have wait times, which is clearly an area that testing people have a lot. You know, we do a lot of waiting in testing. Even with the move to iterative and agile has reduced a lot of the waiting that we do, but we still see that as a prime example of an area of waste. So again, the concept is to link your processes in such a way that you minimize or reduce the amount of waiting or handoffs from one process to the other process, because again, that time that is incurred between one end and the start of another one is considered waste in terms of, is it really providing value to the customer in terms of the delivery of their particular product. Then we've got rejects and defects, which is the business of software testing. So again, we all know that the smaller number of defects and the smaller number of bills that get to you that have to be sent back because they didn't launch or you couldn't actually execute your smoke test is clearly an area where in the software testing industry, this is a waste area that we see on a regular and for us an ongoing basis. And then there's inappropriate processing. And so this is sort of looking at the concept of like taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut so that you have overdone what was needed rather than scaled it to the amount of force or the amount of process or the amount of activity or the amount of work actually matched the outcome or the deliverable that you were hoping to achieve. So in this concept, it could be that we overproduce tests because we're concerned about making sure that we have the right amount of coverage, and rather than having techniques that make sure that the coverage is related specifically to what your risks are, maybe we overproduce or we have inappropriate processing in that area in terms of maybe too much automation, too little automation. So a lot of these concepts, as we go through, I want you to just think about them in terms of a necessary motion. Are we efficient in our processing? Do we have too much weight? Do we have too high of rejects or defects within the life cycle? So again, this was to lay out the concepts for you to get an idea of those wastes and to let you know that these categories can apply in the service industry and they can specifically apply in terms of software testing. So once you got the idea that maybe lean as a concept is something that you could embrace and that you see the value of this as a means to evaluate what's happening in your organization to see if you are as efficient and effective as possible, then you need to begin to start thinking about how do I actually eliminate waste. And so what we're going to talk about here is that this is a thought process change. So you have to really begin to look at activities that you're participating in and to begin to identify, this is an area where waste could occur or there's no real value being occurred here. So to do that, you want to think about areas in your organization where there's work, where you have a lot of partially done work, because that partially done work can relate back to some of those lean waste concepts we just talked about. Is it partially done because you're waiting for information? Is it partially done because you sort of overprocessed and you don't really need it at that point in time? And so it's not just in time. So think about the areas within your particular processes where the work is partially done. Are there areas where there is excess paperwork or documentation? This is an area where definitely clearly in software testing we have lots of documentation. Depending on our industry, some of us are very heavy on documentation. Some of us have lightened up on documentation, but this is an area within your organization to begin to look at to see is the documentation, is the paperwork, is the signature approvals that we have in place, are they necessary? And the question you ask in terms of are they necessary is does having it provide ultimate value to the end customer? So if the answer is yes, then it isn't waste. But if the answer is no, then you have a potential area for waste. So you begin to assess and look at your organization always with that thought in mind. When you build the wrong thing, clearly that is waste. There's no other way about it. If you've got the wrong thing, then that means that you have to do rework. So all the effort that was put into building that wrong thing is clearly waste. Then we have unnecessary task switching or process motions or signatures or approvals that don't add value to the end product and are just bureaucratic sometimes or organizational kinds of things that are in place. And maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, having this step or having this approval or switching it or moving it made sense, but that need is no longer present. And so now it's an activity or an approval or a signature or a switching activity that doesn't add, again, value to the actual outcome of what you're trying to achieve. In general, I know this is a concept that's really hard from a management perspective, those of us that are managers, but a lot of management activities and tracking are often unnecessary in terms of providing the value of the final deliverable to the customer. So you want to look at those management activities so that the ones that are there add value to the ultimate service that you're trying to deliver, that product or service. And then again, in that same context, rethink the authorization systems to make sure that the approvals that you have really are necessary and not just there for the sake of being there. So this thinking, these activities here on the screen, is the thinking that you need to begin to exemplify and use if you want to move yourself to considering lean and that continuous improvement where you're always looking for opportunities to improve, and to do that you're always looking for potential areas for waste. So when we think about an approach to lean, the three activities here, once you've decided that as a service, lean could provide you with an opportunity to make your organization more efficient and more effective, and you started the process of thinking about lean and understanding waste, then you want to take steps to do something about it. So this is a very high-level, quick approach to getting started. One, you want to look at pain points and waste. And if you think about a pain point, any step within your organization or any activity within your test planning, your test execution, your test design, where there is actual pain in the sense of you're being unable to get the work done. So you can't get the test plan done. You can't get test execution done. You can't get your defect reports done. Any of the pain associated with the accomplishment of activity is generally an area for you to start thinking about why is it that I can't get it done? And if you look, there's typically some kind of waste that's occurring that's causing that frustration and that's causing that pain point or the pain that you're actually experiencing. So this is an area for you to look at and to investigate for potential waste. So the first thing is to look at your pain points, look at your frustrations in each of your high-level processes, and those would then begin to be step two, potential candidates for what? Waste that could be identified within your organization. So you look for those pain points, you look for the waste, and then you establish a list of potential candidates, and then you appraise and assess those candidates, and that gives you what? The potential targets. Once you do that assessment and that appraisal, you've got the targets for waste and should be identified waste. And then you get to what the third part that we're going to talk about today at a high level is what do you do about that waste. So this is the approach to getting started with lean. So the key thing that I want to talk about with this getting started is that looking at what you are producing, your service or the waste from the customer's perspective. And I have to admit that this is a bit of a challenge for us in the software testing industry because we don't have a single customer. You look at Toyota and the manufacturing, the ultimate end user, the customer is clearly who? The buyer of the car. That's the main customer. Ours is a little bit more complex because if you think about who our internal and external customers are, yes, at the very end of the software testing and quality process, there is the end user or the customer that actually will be using the product that is under test. But in between that, there are other customers that as a service provider we in testing have to consider. There is the project manager who is managing the project the tester is on. There could be the VP of quality within an organization. So, and each of them may have different services that are expectations that they need from you, and so the value chain or the value stream is going to be a little bit different. We do need to understand what each of those are looking for. If we understand the value that the project manager needs from a software tester or the test manager versus what the director of or quality is looking for from the testing organization or testers within that team that are producing that product, to the value that the actual end user or the product owner is looking for. Clearly there could be some differences. In the end, do they all want working software? Without a doubt. But the project manager might need some other things in the process of getting to that working software that would be of value. So when we assess the needs and preferences of our customers, we do need to make sure that we look at some of the higher level groupings of customers for software testers. And typically it could be 3 or 4 levels: the ultimate end user, the product owner, and it could also be some intermediate organizational entities within that life cycle of getting the software working and to get out the door to the actual end customer. So we're saying make sure you understand what you think the value is that you're providing for each of these customer levels, because if you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to understand the waste that's occurring in terms of the service you're providing to the project manager versus the service that you need to provide to the director of quality versus the service that you need to provide in the end to the product owner or the end customer. So what we have right now is we talked about the concept of lean. We talked about the concept of waste. We talked about, at a very, very high level, the concept of value. And so now I'd like to talk a little bit about what are the tools that help you to identify waste. And there are quite a few tools that are out there. The ones that you see on the screen are not the be-all, end-all, but there are 4 that I could introduce you to in the span of this webinar to get you going in the right direction. So on the very far right, at the top, it says Lean Map of Existing Process. That is an example of what in Lean we call a value stream map. And value stream mapping in Lean management is a method for analyzing the current state, the as-is state of a process like test planning or test execution or test design, and once you map that as-is process, it is the tool that helps you to understand that so that you can then design a future state that is more effective and reflects the elimination of waste. So at Toyota, this was known as the Material and Information Flow Mapping. So this is one of the most fundamental tools associated with the lean improvement activities to help you to identify and reduce waste and to improve the cycle times, the times that you are actually, the measurable time that you are actually engaged in activities that occur in the development of your product or your service. So it's not a complex tool, for a lot of us that have done flow charting. It's an extension of flow charts that we've done in software technology for years, but the value stream map is a very, very important tool because when you're done with it, it provides insight into 2 very important questions. Where are we now? And it helps in guiding you to figure out where you want to go. It's a visual means to depict and improve the flow of the service and production process for producing your product or your service. Then underneath that value stream map is the SWOT analysis chart. And again, the whole idea of looking at waste, we have to identify waste, we have to analyze the potential candidates of waste. So we have to analyze our as-is organization. We need to understand our organization. So SWOT analysis is a matrix that is a structured planning method that used to help you to evaluate the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats involved in, say, your project or business venture or process activities that you are doing or your organization. So you're the testing organization. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? And what are your threats? It can be used in all kinds of decision making, and that template helps you to do proactive thinking so that you're not really relying on just, your thought processes or habit kinds of ideas, but you have to actually ask yourself, what are the areas that are really strong for us? What are the opportunities that occur that we can take advantage of? What are the weaknesses we have as an organization or as a team? And again, it helps you to, again, get that clear sense of the organization so that as you begin to design, you take your value stream map and you begin to look at and try to come up with your to be the future state, then SWOT analysis helps you in that whole process. Then we have on the top left screen the fishbone diagram, or the and it's a cause-effect diagram, and it helps you to identify potential causes for a problem. So if we've identified areas of potential waste, do we really know what causes that waste to occur? So this is the technique potentially that could help you to do that. And again, all of these techniques, if you do search on the internet, there's all kinds of step 1, step 2, step 3 instructions for you. My purpose today is to give you an overview of some of the tools that can be in your arsenal that will help you in the process of identifying that waste and looking at and assessing your organization for efficiencies and effectiveness. And so the main goal of the fishbone diagram is to illustrate in a graphical way the relationship between an outcome, this potential area of waste maybe, and all of the factors that influence that outcome. And this can be used in terms of problem solving or coming to potential solutions. There are lots of means of using the cause-effect diagram. But in the end, you've got a problem, solution, whatever, and you're looking for causes and effect in relation to that particular item. Then the final one we have here on the screen is the Pareto, and we all know about the 80-20 rule. We know that 80% of the bugs are found in 20% of the code. But here we're using this in a slightly different way because we're trying to look at, we use this technique in the whole assessment of efficiency and effectiveness because we're looking from an organizational process, maybe the 80% of the waste areas are maybe occurring in 20% of our processes. So there's lots of different ways that you can use this, the Pareto diagrams. But in the end, it helps us to separate out the vital few from the trivial many. And as a technique in assessing your organization, this is one of the ones that you'll find can be very helpful. So we've talked about some of the tools, and these tools are arsenal of tools are potential ones that will help you in terms of identifying waste, looking at your organization, helping you to figure out what the future state could look at, helping you to come up with what is the cause of particular activities that you are seeing within your organization. So in the end, what you want to have is you have that list of potential candidates, and you want to begin to do what? Assess and evaluate that list of potential candidates to come down to the set of candidate waste areas or inefficiencies that you want to do what? Solve. So that your organization then can eliminate that waste and then become a more efficient and more effective organization. So in the end, we have to do what? Solve a problem. And so what we're looking at here is that once you've got your list of candidates and maybe you've got 2 or 3 that you feel are the significant areas of waste, then we have to ask ourselves, what's the root cause of why this pain point is here? What's the root cause that this waste is occurring? Because if we don't get to the root cause, then we have a big problem. And so what we want to do in terms of problem solving is that we want to think about what Einstein said. If I were given 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 59 minutes in defining the problem. So you have to have a clear idea from your list of candidates what you think the problem is for the top ones on your list. And so you'd want to define the problem, because once you define the problem, then you can begin to do what? Come up with solutions. But if you don't have a clear diagnosis, definition, succinct description of the situation and the problem, not just the symptoms, but what the problem is, then the potential is that you will what? Not come up with a solution that actually addresses what the problem is. So you want to, throughout all of this activities that we're talking about, you have to at some point get to the point where you want to begin to solve the problem. So you want to define the problem, diagnose that situation, describe it in such a way that it's clear and succinct. Then you want to generate some alternative solutions. Then you want to evaluate and select from those alternatives. and then you're going to implement and follow up with a solution. And so in the end, you've done what? Solved the problem. But the 4 steps that you go through are important, because if you don't come up with that clear, succinct definition, then you can't get to what we consider to be the root cause. And that is a really important factor that we need to look at when we're talking about coming up with efficient and coming up with effective activities for test planning, test development, test design, and test execution. So when in medicine, if we think about it, it's really easy to understand the difference between treating a symptom and curing a condition. So if you've got a broken wrist, for example, and it hurts, but the painkillers we know will take away what? The symptom of the pain, but taking the painkiller will in no way address what? The main cause or the root, which is that the wrist is broken. So you have to have what? Another solution other than a painkiller to address the root cause. And so I don't think we can make it any more clearer that this step of problem solving, where you actually get to the root cause, is a critical element, because if you've identified areas of potential waste and you cannot get to the root cause of why the waste is occurring, why you're overproducing, why you have too much wait time, why you can't get, why you have your defect rate is so high. If you can't get to the causal factors, then you will not come up with solutions that do what? Make any meaningful change within your organization. So again, in terms of how do you get to the root, there are steps depending on which Google search you do. There are four-step processes, 5-step processes, 6-step processes or activities to do to get to the root cause. But in the end, most of them have the same high-level kind of approach, in that to get to a root cause, you have to collect some data. Then you have to look at what we call causal factor charting. So you have to do some charting, like the cause-effect diagram that we just talked about shortly, a few minutes ago. But we have to come up with some way to look at the possible causal factors, and then from that list of causal factors, from the data that you've gotten and collected and analyzed, then you begin to do what? Identify what you think are the root causes. You may need to do some testing to see if that's the true root cause, or if that's a, close to root cause but not really the causal factor. But these steps of data collecting, doing cause-effect kind of analysis, and testing to see whether or not the identified cause really is the root cause is what's done until you get to the true root cause. And sometimes it may be more than one root cause. Maybe there's one or two that are related. But in the end, once you've got the causes that are actually making that problem occur, then you can do what? Come up with potential recommendations or solutions to that particular problem. And there are, again, techniques for doing it. One of the best techniques, I shouldn't say best because that's a judgmental kind of thing. One of the techniques that's often used for root cause analysis is to use the 5 whys. And again, if you want to know succinctly how to do it, I'm going to give you an overview here. There are lots of information on the internet that provide you the how-tos, but basically this concept, it's an iterative and interrogative technique. And it's, again, used to explore what? Cause and effect relationships underlying a problem. So it is a very useful technique for problem solving. The primary goal of the technique is to determine the root cause of a defect or problem by repeating the question, why? Each question then forms the basis of the next question. So the 5 in the name comes from that there's an empirical data or observation that the number of iterations that are typically needed to resolve a problem. So that's why there's 5. So you say, well, I have so-and-so and so-and-so occur, and they'll go, why? And you'll say, because this information isn't available. And you go, why isn't the information not available? Well, because we need it at this point and it doesn't come until this time. Then why does it not come when you need it? And so that's the concept between the 5 whys. And so again, this is a tool that came out of the Toyota production system in the 50s. There's books about it. There's all kinds of information about it. But it helps you to dig deep so that you can actually come up with that root cause. So here's an example again of the kinds of questions that can be used. So if you're trying to come up with the purpose of something, like what is done, then what is the purpose? Is the purpose accomplished? Why was it necessary? What if it were eliminated? What would make it unnecessary? Then if you're talking about problem solving related to a place, you're going to talk about where questions. So you have, where is it performed? What alternate locations are viable or feasible? Can the departments be reorganized? So if you're talking about trying to get to an understanding or causal relationship relative to sequencing of when something occurs versus another time, so what other sequence could work? Looking at our testing activities, we do test planning, we do test design. Is that the best sequence for all our activities? Is that the only way that they can be done? What are the implications of the other sequences? So these are questions that help you to get, again, to understanding that causal relationship. Sometimes they're related to who. So who performs the task? Who else could perform it? And then means. How questions. What other methods are available? What other processes or technologies exist? Can smaller scale processes be used? So again, this is just to give you an idea of the type of questions that you would use in your 5 questions that you keep asking. Why does this occur? Why does that person have to do it? Why is this place the place that we use? Why is the sequence the necessary sequence? And so on. And in the end, you should have gotten to the root cause by the time that you've gotten to the end of your series of 5 questions. Another tool that we talked about, what we didn't really talk about when we did the 4 overview, is failure mode effect analysis. And this is actually a failure mode analysis from a project that I worked on. And the problem that they had was that they had a project prioritization process that wasn't working for them. And so they got together yearly and they prioritized the projects, and then the work got to the development team. And so we were looking for a way to analyze the data that we were getting from this project. So we have here the project prioritization, and then we have the steps, and then we've got the failure types that we identify as a part of a lot of analysis that we did on this. We had a value stream map, we had a SWOT chart with strengths, opportunities from interviews, but then we came up with the failure type, like that was a lack of adequate time for individual evaluation in their prioritization process. And then we talked about, well, what's the impact of this lack of adequate time? So it resulted with not enough analysis led to inaccurate categorization of work. So we were getting to what? A cause. And then we had other potential causes. Annual cycle provided only approximately 2 weeks for the review prior to the annual meeting. So we're talking about the timing sequence of when activities occur. And then we had, was this particular problem related to a pain point that the organization was having? And so we identified the pain points. And then the last one is that, were there any controls in the process that allow you to detect that there was a problem occurring? And the answer was no controls existed. So we've got different kinds of failure points that occurred within their process. Not all the proposals got prioritized against national and other program opportunities. They had a steering committee that was used in the process, but they didn't consistently provide information back to the director of the group. And then not all of the programs or offices in the organization prioritized using the same approach or methodology. Then they didn't have, when they did the prioritization, there really wasn't enough data there to do the really kind of good estimates that they needed, so the prioritization was flawed in terms of whether or not how much time it took was also one of the factors. So we had different potential failures that occurred within the process of creating the prioritization for projects that went to IT for development. So again, these are just an example to show you how these tools are used in real life so that you can, in the end, come up with potential areas that are a problem. You assess the impact, you look for root causes, and then you understand the relationship of this to the pain points the organization is having, back to that individual list, and then you allow to begin to then use these to come up with potential solutions. So very quickly at a very high level, we talked about tools and techniques that you can use to assess your organization. So it's more of an introduction of concepts rather than a how-to. But once you've got your items identified and you've got your potential root causes and you know the areas within your organization that are problematic, that are wasteful, how do you get to that to-be place? And so that's what we're going to talk briefly about before we end up with the session today. So when you begin to look for potential solutions, again, one of the things we said, the areas of waste for what? Management activities. So potential solutions could be reduction of some of the management activities that you've identified as not adding value to the actual process of producing your service. Reduction, again, of authorizations and approval, especially if they're not, again, adding value. Every approval or authorization should actually mean something in the context of creating value to the ultimate service or product. You want to look at wait times and identify what can be decided at the last minute. These are really good ideas for you to begin to think, what's the solution to our potential problems? When you're looking at decisions that need to be made, what are those decisions? Is it a tough decision? Is it an easy decision? When is it made? Can they be made later? So these are all, again, brainstorming kinds of ideas for you to begin to do what? Look for solutions. You clearly want to have some kind of brainstorming session with some key people that understand the process, and you're throwing all kinds of potential ideas and solutions out there, and these are categories to help you to look at or look for where those potential solutions could be. And are there areas where team empowerment can influence waste in your particular area? So if everybody's empowered to get it done, does it reduce some of the authorization? Does it reduce waiting for you to tell them what they need to do? So again, areas where you can look for potential solutions. So we're back to that lean framework. So we've looked at, you need to identify your pain points and waste. And you do that by doing a value stream map of your processes and the activities. So a value stream map of test planning, a value stream map of test execution in your organization. And then from that, you're looking at potential areas of waste because you've identified how long it takes you to get from step A to step B to step C to step D. And so you've got a potential list of candidates. And you've taken the tools that we talked about, the 5 whys, the failure mode analysis. You've looked at SWOT charts. You've looked at cause-effect diagrams. You've come up with some potential root causes to some of the myriad problems that you've identified in that list of candidates. And so you've decided on, well, we want to address this area now. And so you problem solve for those particular, let's say we decide that we want to be more efficient. We can be more efficient in test planning. So that's the area that you decided to focus on. So then you do your problem solving sessions to come up with potential ways to solve those potential waste and pain points that you've identified. And then you need to come up with what does the future state look like? What does your value stream map look like now that you've changed your processes, or you reduced these approvals, or you've empowered the team, and so they're able to get things done quicker. And that future solution, what I find is that oftentimes we'll come up with something and it's the ideal, but a lot of times the ideal it just can't be done. And so you have the present state in your value stream map. You definitely want to come up with what would it look like in the perfect world. I love to do those interviews when we're trying to do process improvement when you ask people, in your perfect world, what would test planning look like here? In the perfect world, what would test execution look like here? And sometimes you'd be amazed at the kinds of ideas that people come up with, because typically the people that are doing the work have a lot of ideas, good ideas, about how the work could be done better. So that ideal state could then be mapped, but then you have to deal with reality. And reality may say that for right now, we can't get to the ideal, or the ideal might take us a year, it might take us 6 months, but we can come up with the future state that maybe needs to be iterated. But sometimes your ideal state can be the future state, but sometimes the ideal state can't be achieved in the immediate future, and it may be a progression that you want to get to it. But clearly, to get to either the ideal or future state, you've got to have that assessment and clear idea of the present state. So we want to then talk at the end about, you've got your potential solutions, so you want to recommend them. Higher management typically at some point needs to account for or approve any kind of process activities or changes. And so what can you do to prevent the problem from happening again needs to be included in your thought process as you begin to come up with recommendations and solutions. You need to figure out, how will the solution be implemented? Who's going to be responsible for it? Are there any risks that are associated with implementing it? What kinds of things could go wrong in that process? Are there opportunities that could come up that you need to take advantage of? You want to look at your cause and effect process, identify the changes needed for the various systems or activities that are in play in your value stream map. It's also important that you plan ahead to predict the effects of your solution, particularly on the people that are potentially being changed or impacted by the change that you're getting ready to implement. And so this way you can do what? Spot potential failures before they happen, and actually anticipate that people might respond this way, or anticipate these problems so that they are mitigated and maybe they don't occur, or they're at least addressed effectively when the problems do occur. So in summary, if we're looking for a way organizationally to be a more effective QA testing quality organization, the data and the information says that we're spending a lot of money on testing. Some of us are very effective at what we're doing. Some of us could fine-tune our processes a little bit better, but we do know that lean is a technique that, when applied to the service industry, such as software testing, can provide some very serious productivity, rework, lead time types of gains for you as an organization. And applying these techniques, utilizing these tools, can put you on the path to a more efficient, more effective organization. So this is the time where we'll stop for questions. I think we've got about 10 more minutes before the session ends. So we're open right now for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claynice. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, can you give us some typical questions that you get when presenting this topic?
Yes. One of the things that I do in a full day class that often comes up is that people are very concerned about the different buckets or life cycle activities that we have in the testing process. And so, we generally talked about the 7 wastes, and we talked about them at a high level in terms of organizationally, but we didn't talk about, and there was no time to talk about, what are some typical test planning wastes? Are there some typical wastes that you see organizationally in test execution or test design? And so those are the kinds of questions that I typically see, is that, what about test planning? Is there specific wastes associated with test planning? And the answer is yes. Typically what I do when I do this as a full day class is that, because it's not a canned answer, waste in your organization could be totally different from waste in another one. What I typically do is I start with the steps for what are the typical activities that most organizations generically do for test planning. There's a review of user stories. There's a review of requirements, or you might be waiting on requirements, or you might have to do test planning without requirements. So, but in general, I take the high-level steps for each one of our major life cycle areas, and then we look at are these the steps in general that your organization does? And people usually go, well, yeah, those are the typical steps. And then we go through questions with, well, how is it done here? And that's when we start seeing the waste jumps out. And so typically in a facilitated session like that, people come up with very organization-specific kinds of examples of waste. And I like to do this in a group, because when someone comes up with an idea about waste and someone else says, oh yeah, I noticed that, or I have an example of that. And so I find that when you're done, you have a list of these are common waste that we see across many organizations in terms of test planning. And then we also see a list of things that are very specific to that particular organization. But I found that it helps them to do that lean thinking. And so that's, I think, is the typical one, is that, you know, what waste do you see in test planning? What's the kind of waste that you see in test execution? Generally, I think we all know about the waste associated with waiting for releases to come, or waiting for fixes. So there's some very glaringly obvious kinds of waste that are endemic to almost any organization in our 4 areas of the life cycle.
Wonderful.
Do you have questions yet?
That's all we have today. So I want to thank you, Clenice, for your time today, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's free webinar sponsored by IIST, the leaders in education-based certifications and training. For more information on how IIST can help you or your organization, please visit www.iist.org. Be sure to join us for the next webinar in the series, Quality and Use, Why Do We Need to Understand Our User Experience, on June 3rd from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. To learn more about this and other webinars in this series, go to psqtconference.com. Be sure to register for the PSQT conference before May 31st to save 20% off your registration. Use promo code MAY31 to save 20%, and you can register at psqtconference.com. You can follow IIST on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube to find out more information about IIST news, events, and promotions. Thank you all again for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you, Clenice.
Thank you.